Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and those in between. I'm Sam Blank. Joining me here today is Tahir Carl Karmali. Tahir, your work spans sound, sculpture, painting, installation, and photography, focusing on themes of labor, migration, landscape, and belonging. You received the Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2017. You also received residencies at Pioneer Works and Brick. You have shown at the Shed, Open Call, and the Leslie Lohman Museum. I'm so excited to speak to you about your work today. Thank you for allowing us into your solo show. It's amazing.
Thank you.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. It's been a while since I've done a solo show, especially here in Manhattan, so I'm pretty amped up about it.
Amazing. I wanted to start off by talking about one of the works behind us, this yellow work. I'm really into the way that you are using the stretchy fabric that you have on your canvases and pushing them out with armatures below your canvases. Can you talk about the process of pushing them out or where that idea came from?
Well, so the nylon, this sort of duck nylon stretchy fabric, especially the high vis color, something it's very ubiquitous in New York City because of construction. So you see it all over the place. It's a warning kind of, an individual. It's the whole idea of the body being seen in a mess of construction and rebuilding or construction itself. And then the armatures themselves are bits and pieces that you would use to create a wall. So mostly joists or things that would connect to 2x4s, but then they're sitting on these things to kind of replace ideas of vertebra onto this kind of stretch fabric and body. And then the paint itself isn't white paint or anything like that. It's plaster and gypsum. And then there's iron oxide and things that are associated materials that you would see in making a physical wall or something part of a building as well. That's sort of being expressed on the canvas itself or on this sort of nylon ground. And yeah, just kind of making this into sort of a piece of body or a piece of something, not the whole body, but it's a part of it, like a nerve ending or a muscle.
I remember when I first walked into this show and I saw the push out, and I was like, oh, those spines, it's amazing. And it really works with the paint that you have on these canvases, which brings me to my next question. The titles of these works, they evoke a visceral, often painful connection between body and mind. I'm curious about your process when titling, and if it has anything to do with those bodily forms that you have in your works already.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work is either about people that I know or friendships or experiences that I've gone through, and then also a lot of it is to do with relationship with myself. And myself and my body, and just this show kind of came up during my sort of journey through sobriety for the third time, but in this time around it just felt more bodily, and this kind of matched this kind of reconstruction of self. And also being in New York City, you just see these buildings go up and down, and so this reconstruction of self and your relationship with your body. And so the titles themselves are these very real feelings that you have of either self-loathing, self-love, this kind of thing, and also with how you see yourself with other people and relationships that you have with other people, and how you see yourself through other people's eyes, and then how that could play out in disgust for yourself, love for yourself, and so on. And especially when it comes to substance abuse, and when you look back at yourself when you were abusing who you are, and that. So it has this kind of tension, this sort of duality, this myself, and dealing with that, and who I was and who I am, who I will be, and so on. Yeah.
So the thing that you're referencing giving yourself to is not necessarily a person, but an idea, an event, and also just this feeling of getting over and away from something.
Yeah.
Amazing. As a showing artist, you have to contend with sales in the market. Does that ever play into your process? The worry of sales?
Yeah, I feel it does play a little bit into the process, because you do sort of are told what is more viable to sell and what isn't, and what makes sense and what's movable and like accessibility and all that kind of stuff, like you have to really think about. And especially one of the things is like, is it like too heavy? You know, when you start out, like, do you want to start like with moving incredibly heavy objects all the time, or like how portable something is like something that you really have to think about when you start off, and think about when you actually have to like ship things and move stuff. And I think that's why when I started in photography, that was like wonderful, because like you're literally just moving like a data files most of the time. But yeah, it does play a huge role, like in like what you have to create, what you make, and like thinking about like, oh, I have this one great idea, but then you have to build on these variations, because like people would be like, you know, I can't just, so like this show is like a lot of the first works like this version of this, but then there's going to be multiple versions of these particular objects as you kind of have to create them to make them better and more, I guess, desirable for sale. I mean, at the end of the day, it is sort of like we are in this kind of like the art world is the art world, and like we still have to play around and play with the market itself. It's something you can't ignore, unfortunately, even though you want to ignore it so badly. Yeah.
Would you say you're getting to a point in your career where you can be a little bit more, I'm going to make something heavy, I'm going to be a little bit of a diva with things, or?
Well, I've finally gotten to my career where I am making things that can last longer than like 2 or 3 years, like in like existence. So like more permanent works are like definitely thinking about like the archival aspect of like a lot of my work, because before I really wasn't thinking about it that much, because I was just like thinking about making. And so now I'm kind of more in the process of like thinking about like, okay, being comfortable with knowing who I am as an artist, and like knowing what parts of my practice I can and cannot sacrifice to the making of an object for its like saleability.
And that is just making me wonder about when you did the Shed open call, you had that very large like network. Was that one of the first times you really felt, because I feel like artists I've talked to that have done the Shed open call feel like that budget that they give you and the little freedom, like you really were able to make something heavy and not super sellable. Was that good for your practice, or?
It was both good and like very stressful. Because at the same time, like I was like lucky enough to be able to just sort of like be organized and like get things done and like follow a plan. Because like I submitted my open call and like this was my plan, and I had like, this is what I'm going to do like from when I get the money to like when we have to exhibit. So then I had something to follow through with. But otherwise, it is kind of like you have this thing and you create this large work, and then now after it's done, you're like responsible for it. So now I have this like, you know, this gigantic thing that lives in my studio.
Oh, they don't take it?
No, they don't take it.
Oh, wow.
So now you're just like kind of stuck with it.
Oh, that really changes my view of that, because I'm thinking about people that I know that have done monumental works for that, and now they're just
there. It's just there.
Yeah,
they just have it, which honestly I have been thinking about selling it for parts, because it like luckily enough, and this is kind of like what's led to a lot of my practice, is like luckily enough a lot of the bits and pieces can be pulled apart and then be sold individually to like construction companies and stuff like that. Except for, I mean, like, you know, it has these steel rings, but like all of these kind of connectors, those are all things that people like use in construction. So I can just like sell them. And like I really liked what doing that show made me realize, like, oh, I can like literally just go to Home Depot, build something, or like create something, or like go use like McMaster and Carr and like build something, and then it can be taken down and then redistributed. So then there isn't any like net waste. I mean, there is going to be waste. I mean, essentially, like art is essentially a very like wasteful practice. There's like a lot of waste that comes from it, but essentially I could just like take it out. And like what I'm doing in Senegal as well is like I will be able to put up this installation, which is like made from a bunch of like found and disposed TV antennae that can then be taken down and then repurposed again.
Oh, amazing.
Yes.
And now
I like this idea for installation.
Yeah. I mean, I do think about that a lot with installation. I'm like, where is all that going to go? And I think it's really great that you're thinking about where are things going to go, and you have somewhat of an outline for it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what the shed really taught me. It's like, oh my God, now I have this like, 300-pound like thing sitting in my studio in Bushwick, right? And that I have to like jump over and move around. It's like, you just kind of like have to, yeah. And I think it's a lot about like letting go, like, yeah.
Yeah, I turned my final from last year into a plant potter because I was like, it's gotta go.
You have to be able to think about like the life cycle of like the object, which makes it nerve-wracking with painting, because like when paintings are painting and they're done, I mean, like at least like these can be like, that can be pulled, like this piece can be pulled apart and like you can reuse the joists for something else because those are preserved. This behind us is denim. We can like really just like make that into a new pair of jeans. So like we can actually turn a lot of these things into something else, at least.
It's amazing. That's like, you should teach like the Pratt sustainability class or NYU one. Just
do they have one?
Yeah, I feel like all these universities have these like sustainability classes that don't really go anywhere because they have a lot of simple practice. But you might have a.
I should start. I should have like
it could be Ecoscience 101, the repurposing of artworks or something.
Yes.
Some crazy name.
Pull it apart and put it together.
Yeah.
Repurposing art 101.
Yeah. Okay. Hire Tahir. Tahir does work at Brooklyn College, but I don't think he would be hurt if he was offered more money.
I have been wanting to look for one more class to teach every semester, so please.
To bring it back to sales in a little bit, do the needs of a gallery / the needs of a gallerist ever really affect your process as well, or is that sort of just the same overarching with sales?
So what you're asking me is like, does the gallery's practice influence what I make for them for sales?
A little bit of the general vibe of the programming that a gallery has, but also does a gallerist, the studio visits and their worries about selling and paying their rent ever also play into your work?
They don't really. They really don't. I mean, they do. They when you speak to depending on your relationship with your gallerist, and most gallerists with their artists are very open. At least the relationships that I have with like management that I'm working with here for this show, and the gallery in Nairobi Circle. They're very transparent with me as to like what is going on with the sales and like what the market says about certain pieces and what works and what doesn't work, and how you will sort of like tackle that, because like essentially, yes, we make art to sell, but like we're selling to like we're making art for the exhibition for the purposes of making art, but it's also like selling it and as well for it to have like a life beyond. And so unfortunately that does depend on people buying the actual objects and then making sure. So you have to kind of work within this kind of gray area of like, what can I authentically make within this particular construct that feels like myself? That is a question that you have to deal with like constantly. But then also make the weird thing. Like I always make the weird, like like we have like concrete deli containers here, like candles, and I mean the candles are actually the most viable sellable thing here actually, but like make the weird thing that just feels a little bit outside of the box always for every show. But then you can also find a lot of yourself in like the rectangle that they make you sort of like fill out. And then filling yourself in that rectangle can be like very cathartic and like, yeah. So it's a push and pull, unfortunately. And like, it's just a personal striking of balance. I do have friends who are artists who like literally just talk to their gallerists about like, okay, this is what's sellable. We're going to make 10 more of these, 5 more of these, 3 more of these, whatever. My relationship with my gallerists are not that, where it's sort of like, they'll be like, yeah, like this direction, we like this, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then you're kind of like left with a general idea of what makes sense, but then they just expect you to sort of like fill that out and do that yourself. Yeah.
Okay, great. That was a really comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to also just switch now to what role, just in what influences the work, what role does your queerness play into your work?
That is a really good question. I think it's like, I think especially when it comes to queerness, I think like it's the ability of having this undefined idea of necessarily like sexuality, gender, like self-expression, and the ability to go to a limit or trying to find your limit or like find who you are. And it comes out in the artwork very innately. And yeah, I think this sort of like transformation of materials is something that I think is so innately queer, like the sort of like changing of something or the morphing of something, or like the manipulation of like and changing something into something that you expect to be desirable. That's kind of where it is. And I know it's like a lot to do with it's a lot to do with the body in this show, and like that is, you can see sort of like how this is innately queer. But yeah, I would say it's definitely to do with like your relationship with your body and like others as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Now I kind of want to travel back in time to talk about the things that have come before this show and the works that you're presenting now. You grew up in Nairobi. How has that influenced your work? And you still show there, so you still do have a connection to there.
I still show in Nairobi. I still have a very deep connection to Nairobi. My parents still live there. My family's there. I work in my gallery there. I still participate in the contemporary art world there, but not in like an overhanded, like not too much. I'm like kind of like I'm here for a bit, and then I'll be like, okay, because I just feel like often, because when I did live in Nairobi, and a lot of the diaspora artists would come, and they would be like, they would say like some like outrageous things to us, and so like I'm trying really hard not to be like one of these like diaspora artists that comes back to their home country and being like, in America, you know what I mean? So I try to be just like a very meek, like, this was my idea. Like, I'm just gonna put this little piece of fabric over here and like, let's see, but yeah, deep relationship to Nairobi. It taught me everything about the world and how like the world works and operates. And there's a lot of like concepts and like dedication to like craft and craft making, repurposing, and you just really see a lot, because like it's a post-colonial country, and like kind of this it had to like create itself and like find its own identity, and then start participating in the global market like within a very short period of time. And now and it's interesting to sort of like, it feels both formal and informal at the same time, and like the making of yourself in Nairobi doesn't feel as rigid as like the making of yourself here. Yeah,
that's great. I guess that does also play back into the energy around sales in the New York art world. It's less just intense there.
Yeah, it's a little less intense. The market there is definitely like it's growing, and there is a large market in East Africa and South Africa, and also like because of its proximity to the Middle East as well. So that's like a huge market for East Africa. And yeah, it's growing, and like as Nairobi grows and grows and grows and grows, like there's just going to be more and more wall space, which
That's
is
a great way to put it. There'll always be more wall
there's
space.
just always going to be more wall space to put stuff on the wall for. Yeah. Is that what we're here for?
Yeah. That great. You left Nairobi eventually. I was wondering, a lot of artists I find I get told some of the oddest jobs and most runaround paths that artists take to get to where they are today. How have any of your alternate paths influenced the work that you have before us today?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I didn't actually start off, like my undergrad was not in art at all. It was like in culinary and hospitality. And I always wanted to be an artist, and that was like my goal. Like even in high school, like I did IB, and like my goal was like I'm gonna go to Central St. Martin's, and that's what I want to do, and blah 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 blah. And that was like my like dream. And then right when I was 17, my brother had passed, and so like that was like kind of when I was making my decision. He had passed in England, and I didn't really feel like going to England. Because I just really didn't have a very good relationship to England, not only because of colonialism, but because like, you know, my brother had passed there, and a lot of my ideas of where I wanted to go to university for my BFA in fine art it felt like though if I was to go into that, there was like this real kind of push for me to go towards like graphic design, which
We felt that.
which was like, oh, if I go to art school, then I'm going to end up doing graphic design.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just didn't feel, it just felt like a very formalized way to become a graphic designer.
Mm-hmm.
And then that felt like, okay, this is where I'm going to end up being in graphic design. And graphic design is a wonderful practice, but it just doesn't feel like me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm computer savvy.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways,
and you don't want to do more than that. Just be savvy.
I just want to be savvy at a computer. But essentially, I decided to go with my passion, which was like culinary, which is like very much a craft-based process. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, this is great because this does feel like I can do something with my hands and does feel like artful, and fine art cuisine does have this whole like artistic angle to it. And then I did that, and then I kind of fell into more on the food and beverage marketing side when I moved back to Nairobi. And then it got to a point where I just was like too frustrated with my life, and I was like, I really needed to figure something out. And then I decided I was like, I'm going to pick up a camera and I'm going to start painting again. I was going to start drawing again, and I got a studio in Nairobi. I left my job, and then I worked as an artist, and I worked as an apprentice to an artist. And then that's just kind of how it led into me going to SVA. Mm-hmm. For photography, primarily because photography, was just easier to apply to. Mm-hmm. Like just, oh, I'm going to do a good photo series, I'm going to do photo exhibitions and blah, blah, blah. And then the application process is like literally sending the photographs. And then you can be like, oh, okay, great. And then you do your master's in photography. Mm-hmm. And then that's how I got here. And then that's how I ended up making the arts. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before we talk more about the SVI, I do want to go a little bit back to your career in hospitality. When I was looking, I found that you did an externship in Singapore as well. And I was wondering about that, if any of the Southeast Asian art influences your
I
work?
think about it I think about Singapore like at least once a day. I just like it's one of those things that like, you know, like when like that one student travels abroad for one semester, and that's like their entire identity. But like Singapore is not my entire identity, but like I think about it a lot.
That's amazing.
And I think about Southeast Asia a lot. And yeah, I wouldn't say that necessarily like the art scene inspired me as much as like the community and like the way Singapore's like social how their society is structured, and how like everyone lives, most of Singapore, like 70% of Singapore or whatever, like live in like public housing, and like you live in this like very like communal like area, because I lived with like a family in public housing, and how there's like so much care given to the Singaporean people, but at the same time, it's care to this workforce. It's like kind of like, wow, we got all this care, but it's also like we need this care so that you can be a better workforce. And I think about that a lot with regards to labor. And I think about that with regards to, just being in Singapore and thinking about working there, and then also experiencing like Ghost Month and Singapore's wild. Like it's more, I think like what people absorb from Singapore as tourists is very different from what it actually is, and that is obvious. That is obvious statement, but like a lot of people kind of miss this kind of like part of Singapore that's like hidden. Essentially just because like it has this public image of being perfect and beautiful and all this stuff, but there's like a fun little messy side to it. Yeah.
And then just for our viewers to get sort of a timeline of this process, so you leave Nairobi at 18 to go to your bachelor's for culinary and hospitality, and then you go to Singapore, or you go back to...
I go back to Singapore. I go back to Switzerland. I go to Singapore, then I go back to Switzerland.
To finish your degree.
To finish my degree.
And then you go back to Nairobi.
And then I go back to Nairobi.
And then eventually you move to New York for SVA.
And then eventually, yes. But then when I went back to Nairobi, I wanted to move back to Singapore. So I went to Singapore and I got a job in Singapore. And then like the Singaporean government was like, why are you employing this African guy when we have like a literal workforce that we spent a lot of public housing on? Which like fair game. They spent a lot of money on their own population. That they're like, we're not bringing somebody else.
Yeah. I was recently asking my friend about it, if I could get a visa there just for shits and gigs, and she was like,
it's hard. Yeah, it's also like the most powerful passport too.
I know, I want one really bad.
I know.
I asked her to marry me.
I mean, there's options.
Because she goes everywhere, no visa.
No visa.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so speaking of visas, so you leave your MFA and you do have to probably contend with a US visa. Does that affect your immediate goals leaving your MFA?
So like what happens is like you do your OPT, which is like your optional professional training, which you just have to get like a job for, but like it's like 1 year after. So depending, but if you're like with STEM or you're within STEM, I think you get like 2 or 3 years of that. And so like in that 1 year, I had to figure out how to get my O1 visa.
Okay.
And like had to find a sponsor, and that's the whole thing. In terms of like, so initially I was like, I want to be like, I thought that I was like, oh, I did this photo thing. And I thought that I was like, oh, I think I'm going to like try to be a commercial photographer, which I so failed at because I was a photo assistant for a few people, and I broke equipment, and it just like didn't work. Like I'm not necessarily a clumsy person, like, but just when in modes of labor, I can be very clumsy. I can operate in the kitchen with no problems. But just something about camera equipment, I tend to just sort of be very fumbly with.
Yeah, there's no one yelling hot behind at you. So
No.
How would you know?
No, I broke one of my, I worked for a photographer that did installation photos for the new museum. And I broke her laptop on the day of the shoot while the people, I literally like picked something up and the laptop just crashed in front of the new museum people. I was like asked to leave. And then I got the check. And then I lost the check. So I had to call them to send me the check for the hours that I did prior to breaking the laptop. So that's terrible.
A time before perfect digital banking.
And then I was like, and then I met someone named Nick, and then he was like, you need to apply to artist residencies, and I was like, I don't know if I can get into artist residencies, and I applied for artist residencies, and then I got Brick, and then I got like all that, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm gonna be an artist.
Oof, maybe slide out of my chair a little bit. That one.
Well, that's how that worked. I broke a laptop and I was like, I guess.
And then you went to Brick where they have so much equipment.
Yeah. And then they were like, I guess I have to be an artist because I can't, I'll just break everything around me. Yeah.
In that shuffle of being a commercial photographer, Jesus Christ, I was looking on your LinkedIn and there was a company called LimShift.
LimShift.
What was that? Was she influential to you?
So LimShift was like the brainchild of Yasmani Arboleta, who's a social practice artist, and they were trying to figure out. Well, so it was like birthed out of like MIT, so they were trying to figure out how to combine like not commercial art, but like social practice art and like team building workshops with art making and team building. So it's like both like an HR activity and an interior activity. So we started to try to figure this out, of which we did stuff for like Life is Good in Boston. And we successfully did like quite a few interesting projects with real estate and so on. But it just like, in a way, a lot of companies could not untether or like think of like their public space being defined by the people that work there. Instead, they could only see that particular workplace as something that needs to be applied by the company itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just that, I don't know. And then so we then created this methodology that was like primarily to do with like team building and so on. And then I got really busy with like my art practice that I had to be like, we can't do this. And well, the company just sort of dissolved anyways. Mm-hmm. But it was a fun startup.
Yeah, so you're working there while you're also starting to get residencies and footing in your career.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I was making the slides. Remember I told you I was good at computers?
Yeah.
I was computer savvy.
Yeah, that's where.
That's what I was doing.
Yeah.
I know how to use Keynote really well.
Wow. Do you know how to use Slide Room really well?
Slide Room?
Did you ever do Slide Room?
Like submission? For like my residencies.
Yeah, because I hate Slide Room.
Yes.
Yeah. So you'll do my Slide Rooms for me.
What you should always have, actually, is a working document that answers all these questions.
Okay.
So go through your Slide Room, if you've ever applied for residencies, and then like put all your answers together for every one of these questions. And then if you really feel so inclined, you can actually like mash them all together or like figure out what was good and what wasn't. And then you feed that to ChatGPT, and then it will tell you like to change it to this like really like formal thing. And then you have the two pieces of thing, and then you just kind of like figure out how to do it. And then you send it to one of your friends who is a curator, hopefully has a PhD, to read it and then give you further edits, and then you edit that, and then you just have that as a living document.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So everyone needs to go find a friend with a PhD in curatorial studies. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to go start loitering around University of Delaware and just like sit around their graduation and panhandle for writing help.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Exactly. Always make friends with someone who is a writer.
Yeah. Or
who can write.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that my producer helps me write these questions. I couldn't live without it.
You have to write.
And ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. She is the best proofreader ever. She's
really good. I mean, as a professor, I sometimes like wish more of my students would use ChatGPT because some of the writing is terrible. Ooh. You know, I'm just like, oh gosh, no, it's fine.
It's not their fault. It's the American school system.
I think it is because people have an idea of what an academic piece of writing should look like, and they feel kind of like, oh, I have to write in this particular way, that they just don't end up using their voice or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. Speaking of being a professor, a lot of professors I've talked to say that they learn stuff from their students. So the students give back to them in some way, even if it's just in their debauchery.
Yeah.
What would you say are like one or two things that you've really got taken away from your students?
Well, I very often tell my students that they have bad ideas, and then I take those ideas. That's but it's for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No. No, a lot of my students have like really amazing ideas, and like it's great to cultivate them and tell them, you know, how to introduce them to artists and so on. But I do learn a lot, and it's weird because you learn while you're lecturing. You'll be like teaching someone, you'll be like whatever, and then you like, eureka, like something just happened, and then like you made like this connection while you're like teaching, I don't know, design hierarchy, and then you come up with an idea, and then you're like, oh my god, I'd like have like 2 more hours of this class, but I really want to like expound on this idea. And so you have to like always have like little things to write down. Always keep notes about the notes that you come up with when you're teaching. Teachers should keep notes of their own notes.
Amazing.
It makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I think you're just talking about everyone needs their own personal librarian.
Yes.
To archive their information.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And curator.
Yeah. All right. So everyone needs a Theaster Gates, basically.
Yes.
That's a librarian and curator and archivist. Okay.
And potter, actually.
Yes.
Theaster Gates is also a ceramicist.
Amazing potter.
A very good roofer as well. I feel like every time I go to any of Theaster Gates' like thing, like I aspire to be more like Theaster Gates, because every time I go to one of his shows, he has like a new talent. He's like the FKA Twigs of like, next thing you know, he would learn sword fighting. Like I want him to do a sword fighting music video. When I was working at LimShift, we did a lot of research on Theaster Gates, because like that was like one of the social practices that he had with like his library and his whole thing that he did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that video of his jazz band. I think they're so good.
There's also like a whole Apple documentary on him.
Oh, like Apple TV?
Yeah.
Oh shoot, I just got Apple TV last week from my grandma.
I think there's a show called Home.
Okay.
Yeah, and this like Theaster Gates talks about home.
Okay. Apple TV, if you want to sponsor us.
Yeah. Could you imagine?
Yeah. They call me right now. They're somehow in the camera. They're everywhere.
They like call me on my phone.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is an Android.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just have one final question. We talked a lot about like what influences you. Is there anything at all that I did not ask you that you really think the world has to know about your process?
I love boxing, as you know.
We met boxing.
Yes.
For everyone's context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that...
I do not spark to hear. I like my life.
Yeah. I think you have to remember as an artist that like what you do, like your job is artist, your hobby is something else, right? So like my job is artist, my hobby is like boxing, right? So when people talk to me outside, like at my local bar, you know, like how it's like, I don't want to talk about work, and people like often like think that, oh, it's okay to talk to artists about their work, which is like fine, I don't mind you, but that's labor for me to talk about my work. I'd rather talk to you about boxing because that's like my hobby. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah, thank you. This was really good.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us this week. I will see you next week when we have another amazing artist, curator, gallery. Maybe we'll find your curator and we'll ask them what it's like to interview or to help you. I'm the interviewer. Damn, that was difficult for me to get out.
Yeah. Jesse Firestone.
Jesse Firestone is your proofreader?
Well, there's like several.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jesse Firestone, Ahana Dozier, Jenny Garrow.
Okay.
Yeah, Jenny Dro.
If any of those people want to come talk about, the interview will not be about your work at all. It will just be about what it's like to proofread for Tahir.
Yeah.
2 hours uninterrupted, going over your documents.
I wonder what Ahana would do. Like, that she'd be like, no.
Yeah. Alrighty, now let me do the outro. Okay. Thank you everybody for joining us this week. Thank you to Tahir for joining us and allowing us to be in your solo show. I will see you guys next week. Thank you. Have a great day. Have a great night. Have a great 2 a.m. if you're watching this on Insomnia Bend. Bye-bye.